So if you've joined us before with other gatherings, whether in person or virtually, you know that we like to create a shared space with the values that Alina just talked about. And so really we just want to ensure that everyone feels a sense of belonging and knowing that this is a space that we're creating together. So first off, everyone's ideas are valued. So this is based on egalitarian principles that we are all inherently worthy and equal, and our voices all carry the same weight. Because we have limited time, we want to be thoughtful with our words and ensure that we also have time to share. It's something that we've heard in our evaluations. People really value that time to share. So we want to share our thoughts with care and allow others to share as well. Listening for understanding. Sometimes we listen to answer or we anticipate what we want to say. And so it's nice to just really sit back and listen and cultivate that open space in minds. 4, just being present, minimizing distractions. The virtual space has opened many doors for us to be able to connect, but also comes with many distractions, right? An email box that might be dinging. So please, make yourself comfortable, close those other windows if that's appropriate. And we encourage you just to be comfortable, grab some water and snacks if needed. And 5, respecting privacy and confidentiality, as Alina said. Please, no recordings or screenshots. This is a space of mutual respect and confidentiality. We'll not share any information without your permission. And number 6 that I always like to add that is not on the screen is just to embrace the awkwardness of the virtual space. Sometimes it's hard to unmute or we talk over each other, and that's okay. We're all here with common beliefs, common value systems, and together we'll be able to create this space together. So now it's my honor to introduce our featured speaker today, Ken Paul. For the past 9 years, Ken has advocated for First Nations chiefs regionally, nationally, and internationally on all aspects relating to fisheries, aquaculture, oceans, governance, and aquatic resources as they relate to the inherent and treaty rights, legislation, and policy. This includes Indigenous knowledge, economic prosperity, community engagement, and resource management. Ken is currently the lead fisheries negotiator and research coordinator for the Wolastoqey Nation, serves on the Restoring Balance Advisory Council, and is a dedicated father of 2. Thank you so much, Ken.
Bli Bengizgak, Nadapiak, Nagaskijnuak, Niliwas, Sagligap Boardmo, and Naga Najia was Stukied and Cook. Yes, so I'm Ken Paul. I come from a Wolastoqey First Nation, which is spans the Canada-US border up on the North Atlantic coast. And currently I'm in my home community of Tobic, or otherwise known as Nagutgok. And today I have the honor of sharing some really, really ancient teachings that was shared with me by many people over the years. I do have to acknowledge my elder, Gwen Bear, who was my very influential teacher. She has passed on about 8 years ago now. And I've received encouragement from her. I've learned many lessons from her. I've gone through ceremonies with her, and I think about her often. So what I will share with you today is just some of the teachings that I have received, and hopefully that this will provide some framework for all of us here, the participants, to use in our daily lives. And I have about 50 minutes, a little less than 50 minutes, and I'll get a 5-minute warning at the end if I start rambling on too long. So I'm going to try sharing my screen. I'm doing this with PowerPoint presentation, and we'll have time for a bit of Q&A afterwards, and then a chance to go in our breakouts. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the symbol, of course, is a circle. And the circle is one of the most common symbols that you will see amongst most religions and most spiritual practices on earth. Very powerful symbol, of course, because it has no beginning and no end. This is a two-dimensional representation of a circle. When we put in the vertical and the horizontal, there's a bunch of ways you can look at this. One of them is that it bisects the circle in 4 different ways, or I guess 2 different ways, so that we can actually look at things balanced from the north to the south and the east and the west. You also can think of the lines as being circles that are coming into the screen, both vertically and horizontally. So it's sort of a rough way of looking at a 3-dimensional piece. So this symbol here is what I call the first and top is called the 4 directions. The teachings I teach today, they're common amongst a lot of American Indian and First Nations in North America, and it is even prevalent in some of the South American tribes. But I just want to let people know and acknowledge that I'm not trying to present like a pan-Indigenous framework. This is the teachings that came to me. Every nation has their own way of looking at their viewpoints of the world. But there are some commonalities in some of these things. And so I'm hoping that what I shared today will have relevance that you can bring home to your home territories. Oh, so these 4 cardinal points on the east, south, west, and north have also representations in healing. We all know about our physical healing. That's if we get an injury, a cut, a bruise, we can actually physically help ourselves. Mental health, we have to, that's starting to get a little bit more, I guess, acceptable to talk about in public now. I know that a lot of people went through crises during the COVID lockdown with respect to mental health, and certainly in Canada, there has been a lot of effort trying to put money into mental health services. Emotional health is something that I don't think a lot of people really have an understanding about. And when I first was learning about this, I had troubles really understanding the concept. But when I think about these things, if I didn't really understand what emotional health was, I kind of think, okay, let's think of extremes. So what's an emotionally unhealthy person? So an emotionally unhealthy person to me would be somebody who gets angry easily, or somebody who cries easily, or somebody who laughs inappropriately, almost nervous-like. And to me, like, I know that there's underlying factors when people have those kinds of reactions. They could be, victims of abuse. They could be going through family crisis or things like that. So I'm always trying to promote emotional, healthy work. Spiritual health, that's another thing that's really personal to everybody. There's a difference between spirituality and religion. The way it was taught to me is that religion is something that somebody has learned and is trying to teach to you, a practice, whereas spirituality is your own experience. And so we are all spiritual beings, and we all should try to honor a way of honoring our own spirituality, whatever methodologies that you all use. So all 4 of these aspects can manifest into our personal beings. And the way that they work, the physical aspect becomes our body. The emotional aspect becomes our heart. And I don't mean the muscle, I mean like the heart that controls our emotions. The mental aspect becomes our mind. And the spiritual aspect becomes our spirit. So the way that where these are placed is very, very important. So we're actually looking at balance. For example, in the physical aspect, whenever we go, like there's a ceremonies that we do up here in our nation called sweat lodges. And if you'll notice that this, a sweat lodge is actually a domed structure. And just like the upper half of the circle, and the idea is that that dome will continue underneath the earth, so that we are occupying the space above the earth in order to touch and get in touch with spirits that are below the earth. A sweat lodge ceremony is physically punishing ceremony. It's very, very cramped, it's hot, it's dark, it's hard to breathe, but we suffer physically in order to get in touch spiritually. So that's where we try to find the balance between physical and spiritual. From the mind and the heart, there are lots of adages, and you'll see lots of stuff, memes on Facebook with talk about the longest journey is from the head to the heart. Well, really, what that means to me is that sometimes things will make sense logically, but they won't feel right. Or sometimes your intuition will say something feels right, but it won't make sense logically. So the best kind of decisions we can make are those that make sense logically and also feel right. So this is why we're trying to narrow that space between the mind and the heart. And I will also acknowledge that I'm not always in balance. I don't think anybody is. There are people that are certainly better at it than me. But what I try to do every day is I try to do something physical. So for my body, I'm going to put these up here as well. So these four things that happen that are associated with each of our four directions. The heart gives us the ability to feel. The body gives us the ability to do things physically, like I can pick up, this object and wave it around. The mind gives us the ability to think, and the spirit gives us the ability to see or to envision. And when we close our eyes, when we pray, we actually start to envision things. Most people will pray with their eyes closed so they can see something that happened in the past. Maybe they're trying to envision something that's happening at this time in another place, or something that they want to see in the future. But that's where we get our vision. So what I try to do to keep my balance every day is, for my physical, I try to do something good for my body, whether it's eating healthily or taking a walk or taking the stairs instead of the elevator. For my mental aspect, I always try to learn something new every day by reading something, by listening to a podcast, by hearing what people are doing. I try to exercise my mind. For the heart, I try to express a true emotion with somebody every day, like providing a compliment or really actively listening so that that person feels validated. And for the spiritual aspect, we can do something formal, like as far as like prayers. We can do things like smudging of sweetgrass. I did smudge with sage this afternoon. But oftentimes, if I'm on a really, really busy day and I don't have time to do stuff like that, for myself, I will go outside and I will spend a little bit of time outside and just kind of marvel at the fact that I am this being on this small planet in this giant universe, and thinking about all of the things that had to happen to manifest for me to be here today, and just appreciate that I have relationships with all the other living beings on this planet. So I think by acknowledging that every day, like like I say, I'm not always in balance, but at least I try to work on it. I think that's what's most important. So if our world was in balance, you can kind of look at it as four equal pieces of pie. But unfortunately, what we do, we tend to have our balance looking like this. So in other words, like we tend to care about our physical appearance. We tend to value smart people. We tend not to really value relationships and emotions. If somebody is a touchy-feely person, you kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to like get too close to them, they might try to hug me. And with respect to the spirituality and the culture, our spiritual leaders tend not to be as revered as they should be in general in our greater society. So I'll come back to this imbalance part a little later on in the lecture and talk about reasons why, and hopefully reasons why, how we can actually try to bring things back into balance. Okay, so one of the lovely things about this model is that it can work out at different levels. So at the first level, we have to work on ourselves. And then the next level of instructions is to work on my family. Now, I can't instruct my family what to do. But what I can do is demonstrate my own behaviors and guard my own relationships and my own reactions. And hopefully that has a positive impact on my family. But it takes more time. So after you work with your family, then you have the ability to work within your community. And the same thing, I cannot control what my community is going to do, but I certainly can control the way that I conduct myself. And hopefully I am like demonstrating positive values. And that takes more time too, because obviously there's more people. But then after you work on your community, then you can work on your nation. And that could take years, generations to do that. So this model, when it comes out, is really a spiral, right? So circles, cycles, and spirals to me are all part of the same thing. So when we have the spiral, there's a few representations of spiral that I see a lot. So this is a fiddlehead. We call it mosses, sausage. And this is a little greenery that is actually growing right now. You can pick it for about 2.5, 3 week period in the spring. And it's a strong, strong cultural symbol amongst the Wabanaki Confederacy, which is the Wolastoqiyik, Besquet-Magwadi, the Penobscots, which are located in the United States, and the Mi'kmaq, which are primarily on our sister nation in Eastern Canada. Here's a bunch of other spirals representations. So you can see that the spiral is really part of all creation, whether you're talking at a very, very small level or a super macro level, like the picture of a galaxy in the middle. I actually follow some nerdy math Facebook groups that talk about, the 108 degrees and the sacred, the golden ratio and stuff like that. But a lot of them really are showing mathematical constructs as to in nature and how that relates to mathematical representations. So this is where I get some of these symbols for this. So when we pull that simple symbology at a societal level, things start to change. So instead of dealing with the body, the mind, the spirit, and the heart, this is what manifests at a societal level. So our spirituality becomes our culture. And culture really is like a representation of our core values and our spirituality. We do that through song, we do that through theater, we do that through dance, we do that through art. So all of these cultural aspects that we are doing in expression, this is really coming back to our touching on our spirituality. The social and community health comes from the emotional aspect, because you're really dealing about relationships, and you're talking about how are we taking care of people in our communities. So you want to have a healthy community, you want to make sure that everybody's cared for. Economics is the physical aspect of our society, and I'm going to have a little talk about that in a second, because I had a hard time with that initially. And politics becomes the mental aspect, because this is where we come up with our policies and our laws in order to really dictate how our society should be working together. So when I was first taught this, I really had a hard time with the economics aspect of it. So this is going back a good 25 or so years, maybe even a little bit longer. And the reason is because like I always thought this belief that our economics is the reason why we have so many social problems in our communities and environmental problems. And I started thinking about this more deeply when this was first, presented to me, because I had to, like, it was presented and I had to go away. And sometimes these things take weeks, if not months, for me to really understand. I'll do it in prayer and ceremony. But I was thinking about economics, and at the time, people were chaining themselves to old growth forest trees in the West Coast of British Columbia against big business, big logging businesses. And I started thinking about, okay, so why are we doing that? Well, they were doing that because there's something problem. So there's a problem with the economic model. So then I started thinking, okay, well, if my teachers are saying that economics is part of our circle today, then it was part of our circle 500 years ago. So then I started thinking, well, 500 years ago, what did the ancestors do for economics? What was economics back then? And so in order to take care of the physical needs, the ancestors would hunt for food and use the hides and the bones for tools and use the hides for clothing. They would build shelters out of, like, a lot of them were mostly in this area would use them, make them out of birch bark and alder and spruce. So you have like the classical teepee, or we call wigwams here. Um, they would build canoes and snowshoes and toboggans for transportation, and they would have other materials to trade with other people if they wanted to have other goods. So today, when I am working with my tribal nation, I get a paycheck. Well, with that paycheck, I'm able to pay for my clothing. I'm able to provide myself with shelter. I'm able to buy food. I have a vehicle, a car, and I can buy other little shiny things because we are all we all like. I'm kind of attracted to shiny things, I'll admit, but those are all part of my physical needs. So then I started thinking more deeply about, okay, why did I have that initial guttural reaction when somebody said economics? So then I started learning about other types of circles. So what I started learning about was the life cycle of a tree. So a tree, basically, simply has 4 stages. So with that, there's the birth of the tree, where it starts to sprout up little saplings, usually come from some type of seed. There's growth. A tree will grow. A tree dies, and death is a process. We think of it as an event, but it's actually a process. Sometimes it's a really fast process. But a tree, like I have a lot of spruce here just outside my window, and the trees are dying from the bottom up. The spruce is healthy on top, but the branches on the bottom are dying off and drying out. And when that tree dies, it's going to fall to the earth and it's going to decay, and it's going to start feeding the soil for the next generations of trees. And what I had kind of concluded when I was trying to think about like economics, it seems that in our larger society, we are worried about the growth, so creating new businesses, or sorry, the birth and the growth. So the mantra within modern economics, if anybody's taken any business administration courses, is that businesses have to continually grow. They have to grow, grow, grow. But to me, like, the bigger the tree, the harder the fall. And so this is why, for example, we had the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. There are other crises that happen where they try to keep growing businesses, but what tends to happen is that they end up using resources on this planet. And although I know, like, a lot of the politicians here in Canada will talk about Canadian being prosperous and getting ahead, but if we are a prosperous country here in North America, then somewhere else on the planet, somebody is sort of paying for that, because we're in a finite system and there has to be a balance. Like, if everybody in the world lived to the same standard that the average person does in North America, we'd need 4 planet Earths of resources to feed that thing. So so that makes me think about like my consumption patterns and things like that. When we think of what's happening with the oil and gas sector, they're actually going through this death cycle and decay, as it is polluting the atmosphere. So there's too much carbon being released. But to me, what's happening when I think about carbon is that the birth and growth of that's coming out of that natural death is going to be renewable energy. And renewable energy does have its drawbacks as well, but at least now this is going to be an alternative way of gaining energy for ourselves. So that's how I've learned to accept economics. Now, when we look at our model again, we got to look at the politics and the social in the North and the South. If politicians are going to make policies, they really need to include the community. Because if they make policies and laws that will including the community, then there will not be any like longevity to what they're doing, and it won't get support. When we look at the East and Western sections, investments in culture will provide economic gain. So I know that there's an area in Canada, the oil patch, which is actually suffering from major wildfires right now up in northern Alberta, out in the prairies. And there's a lot of people who go up there to work. But when people go up there and they make a lot of money, they don't stay because they'll go somewhere else in order to enjoy their life. So if you think of cultural capitals such as like New Orleans, for example, it's known for the Jazz Fest, or for country music fans, it's Nashville. And then you can look at Broadway in New York. Like these are cultural places which inspire us. We are seeing our artists, and it's always good to make those connections between culture and economics. Also, if you look at the other way, the culture should inform the economics and what we are going to be investing in and what we're going to be providing for priorities. We should be doing. So each of these four sections gives us these gifts when our circle's in balance. So the culture, it actually teaches us respect, how to get along with each other, how to respect ourselves. The social and community health, when we're in balance, teaches us caring. The economics, when everything's in balance, will teach us sharing. And we'll see that at our community level. We'll see that whenever people are doing well, we want to share. We want to have community feasts. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance for a good education and things like that. So this is one of the reasons why when we raise funds in our community, we try to look at the greater good so everybody has decent housing and can do fun things. The politics, when everything's in balance, teaches us honesty. So it's nothing like an honest politician. Okay, so unfortunately, our society is not in balance. And our society tends to look like this. Whereas we tend to favor our economic leaders, we kind of know what Elon Musk is up to and pay attention to Jeff Bezos and all these headline grabbing people. We tend to focus on politics. There's a lot of effort. It gets a lot of media coverage. I know, like, for example, today that the world leaders from the G8 summit are meeting in Japan. That was the lead story on the radio this morning. I woke up having my coffee. We tend not to value culture as much. So, the whole stereotype of the starving artist, for example, like how many of us actually go to community theaters? How many of us will support like, a busker, for example, who's actually playing music for us? We will follow the superstars, so Taylor Swift, who's making gazillions of dollars and a very talented woman. But I'm just wondering how many other Taylor Swifts are out there that are not that renowned or don't have that kind of media machine behind her. In the social and community health, we tend not to value that aspect in general in our larger society. And if you think about what do we pay our daycare workers, or what do we pay our nurses? What kind of living do we have for people that are working in seniors' homes? These are the people that are supporting our elders. They're supporting our youth. They're raising our youth and those that are have illnesses that need healing. This is what tends to happen. And when that happens, the gifts become liabilities. So instead of respect, we tend to practice disrespect. Instead of a caring society, we become uncaring. Instead of sharing, we practice greed. And instead of honesty in our politics, we practice dishonesty. So why does this happen? Well, one of the major factors why this happens is fear. We use fear and we talk about fear, and it's prevalent within all of our media outlets. Um, it's hard to avoid. I was instructed by Gwen to not use fear-based languages when I can. So I try really hard to be pay attention to what I say, and I try to present things in a positive manner because there's all kinds of negative stuff that's already out there, and I'm trying to build an optimism for a future and have people see the possibilities. Because when we fear something, we react differently. So I'm afraid. I'm afraid to grow old. I'm afraid that I might lose my job. I'm afraid that I will be alone. I'm afraid that I won't have the right kind of food. I'm afraid that I won't be attractive enough. Um, Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney used fear to justify the war in Iraq. You'll see a lot of politicians do that. Fear of the economy. Oh, we're going to stay ahead. Oh, fear of invasion. So we have to put money into our military. So this is unfortunately a very, very important thing that we have to acknowledge, and hopefully we can mitigate the problems with that. So what brings it back into balance is love. And love has many, many different forms. So yes, we know Valentine's Day, you have that romantic love with your sweethearts and, you know, roses and, all kinds of other, hearts and all that kind of stuff, lots of emojis. But also love means self-respect, loving yourself and treating yourself properly and accepting yourself and forgiving yourself when you feel like you've not done things properly. Love means also like respecting, like I love my kids. I respect them. I love my team from Red Star because I've become close with them. I have so much respect for them and for what they've done over so many years. I have love for nature. I love and respect the plants that are outside. I have a lot of geese and ducks that are kind of spending time out here. I respect them. I give them their time and their space. They get kind of noisy, but this is their world too. So I love, so I express that kind of love. And if there is a crisis, this circle will go back into balance. So if you think about when the airplanes flew into World Trade Towers, there was George Bush flew around up in Air Force One in an airplane. Washington didn't matter because they were trying to figure out what was going on in the United States. They closed down Wall Street, so that was the economics. And then people started gathering together, the social aspect. And a lot of people started flocking back to culture and back into prayer, into churches and things like that, because they needed that. If there's a death in my community, they'll close the band office. Most of the businesses will close out of respect for the family. The community leaders, not, leadership, like we have economic leaders, political leaders, the community leaders will come together and support the family. And that might be things like bringing food. That might be things like driving older people to be with the family if they don't have transportation. So that's part of the caring. And then the cultural aspect, whether people are following the church or our traditional practices, people will start doing those kinds of things too, like building a sacred fire, for example. So that crisis of a death in the community brings this thing into practice. During COVID, that was another crisis. We had to come back. The politicians, they kind of lost a lot of the, I guess, airtime because they didn't know what was going on. It was really a lot of nurses and doctors that were trying to instruct people. There was a major hit to the economics because of it, because of COVID. We all had to isolate. We really had to appreciate the social disconnection that we have. And all of a sudden, our nurses became really, really important. People were banging pots there for a couple of weeks, but that was an acknowledgement there. We had social media. That was a way of people connecting. But I know on social media, like bands were given free concerts. I did an online painting lesson on social media. There was, I joined a cooking class on social media, right? Because that was kind of a way of building virtual because we were in a crisis. So it's too bad that it often takes a crisis to bring our circle into balance, even if only temporarily. But if we can practice mutual respect and love in a broader sense, I think we'll have a better chance of having this in balance. So another layer I want to present. Um, I just want to be conscious of the time as well. Environment. So when I was taught this, there was a little group of us that was doing these learnings, and a friend of mine had asked our elder, like, where does environment fit? And our elder looked at him and says, where do you think it fits? So I knew the elder kind of didn't really want to say, and he thought about it. My friend thought about it. He goes, in the middle, and she goes, that's right, you know. So he answered his own question. And it's true that any one of these things we can put into the center of our circle and look at the 4 different aspects of it. Like if we brought economics in, we can look at the cultural aspects of economics, the politics of economics, and the social community impact of economics. But for me, and again, this took months, I put environments over with culture. And the reason why I do that is because, like our spirituality, we can't physically touch it. And like our culture, the environment is really everywhere. And I have a lot of friends that do not, they declare themselves atheists or agnostic. They do not follow a church. They say they don't follow spirituality. Some of them will do things like yoga and meditation. So that's a form of spirituality. But a lot of my friends will go out kayaking, or they'll go out hiking or canoeing. And in the winter, they'll go cross-country skiing. And they want to be out in nature in order to get stronger spiritually. So for me, I'm comfortable with putting the environment over in the spiritual realm. Technology was something else that had come up in the conversation because I was invited to go on a course, which I actually didn't do. But in the right up to the course, it said, we're going to teach the modern manager how to deal in an area with political change, economic change, social change, and technological change. And I thought, okay, politics, economics, social, but does technology belong for a culture? And then I started thinking, well, technology, what is that? Well, these are tools. These are tools to help us do our work. And so to me, that would fit naturally in the physical realm. So I've done this presentation a number of times. This one time I did it in front of an elders council there were Mi'kmaq educators. They were all actually all retired teachers except for one person. And I was really intimidated, you know, trying to present cultural stuff in front of elders is, you know, really a litmus test for yourself. But after I finished it, there was one elder, Merdina Marshall, who sat right in the front. And every time Merdina raised her hand, picked up a pen, like I was so hyper aware. I was like, I have this fear / respect for her. And I really didn't know what I didn't know how she would react to me presenting this. But at the end, when I presented this model, she came up to me and she goes, you did pretty good. I says, oh, great, thank you. He goes, now with that environment and technology, now you have to do your north and south. So, okay, so you just gave me work. Okay. So over the years, what I have developed, because the environmental technological aspect is some of the stuff that I actually deal with my work in fisheries. And what I concluded in the mental aspect, I put knowledge systems. So that can be indigenous knowledge systems, that can be Western science knowledge systems, but these are the things that feed our intellect to make us have understandings. And in the South, I put biodiversity. Because when you are working in a natural environment, like there was nothing in isolation. There was these relationships, these intimate relationships between mosquitoes and animals and, you know, things like salmon and trees and grasses. So for me, I make sure that in my daily work that I understand, I do the knowledge system stuff. We have to study stuff. And I work with scientists and other elders that have different kinds of knowledge. We have different kinds of technology depending on the work that we're doing. we're doing work in the environment, so we have to actually prepare ourselves for being out in these things and being out there at the right time of year, because animals and plants will thrive at different times of year. And I also have to respect the biodiversity. And so science without understanding biodiversity interrelationships is not really going to be sustainable. It's not going to be healthy. It's not going to give you the answers that you need. So this is how I've been building out on these circles. Just sort of an aside, and I think this is kind of important as well, when we're talking about cycles, the 4 stages of life, which was taught to me, is infancy, youth, adulthood, and elder, which kind of feeds back into infancy, because as our elders get older, they need to be cared for. They have problems with digestion. They have problems with mobility. And, eventually they're going to take that spirit walk. So this is a nice cycle to think about. But at these different stages, we have primary responsibilities. And I'll show you this because I want to also just emphasize the balancing part of this. The infant's primarily responsibility is to grow. So they have huge growth spurts when they're very, very young. For a youth, the primary responsibility is to learn. And youth, to me, isn't an age, it's more of a developmental stage. There could be youth that could be in their 30s. There could be people in the youth that only reach into their 20s. But that's just what I know. For an adult, it's the ability to work. So as an adult, I know that this is the time where economically I'll do really well. This is my time to do this. And for the elder, the responsibility is to teach. So my responsibility to work, I do that so that I can build a better society for infants to grow. So I contribute to the society. I make sure that I'm conscious of the things that I do. I contribute to my society. I try to give value back. But for me, really importantly, is that if ever we have elder gatherings, we should bring in youth, because the youth are the learners and the elders are the teachers, and vice versa. If we have youth gatherings, we really should bring in elders. So, and if we think about the mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical, in your infancy, you're really at your strongest spiritually, because you're just coming into the world. You're not affected, as long as you had a healthy pregnancy, if gone through a healthy pregnancy, you are not affected by like all of the things going on in the world. So, and if you bring a baby into a room, like people will feel that spiritual energy, and they'll actually crowd in, and all of a sudden, like that baby becomes the center of attention no matter what. For youth are very emotional. Their relationships are the most important with their friends. So this is why we put youth down in the south. For the adults, again, I talk about this is when I'll be physically my strongest and I'll have most of my abilities. And for the elder, the teachers, as long as they're not going through a disease like dementia or something like that, that's where all the knowledge comes from. So this is how I align these things as well. And again, another example, there was a World Summit in 1991 in Rio. They're talking about sustainability. There was an international accord. They've tried to renew that accord a few times. The last time they did it was, I think, in Egypt in October, I believe. But what they talk about at a global scale is economic sustainability. They talk about environmental sustainability, our environmental protection, and social sustainability. So they talk about those as the 3 pillars of sustainability. Now, the problem with that, though, is that even though they made these international accords and declarations, and almost all the nation states in the world signed on to the accord in 1992, we are still suffering from climate crises and all kinds of other social crises. And to me, the missing ingredient was there was an assumption that political sustainability was a given. So, but if you look at some of the things that are happening in some of our larger democracies, like the United States, the problems with Brexit in England and the European Union and things like that, I really do think that we really have to just can't assume that a democracy is sustainable. It's kind of an experiment. It's something that came out of ancient Greece, and it's a model, but it's not. To me, it just doesn't really fill the demographic of what a democracy has been claimed to do. So I just thought I'd put that up there as well. Another example I'll show a practical use that I use for this, if I'm planning a conference.
And I'm going to give you your 5-minute warning like you asked.
Okay, good, because I'm almost ready to wrap up.
Great.
So when I'm doing something, this is a practical model. I showed this up so people that I work with, like this is how I use this model. So if I'm planning a conference, I look at these 4 aspects, and I may not talk about it overtly. I might just do this covertly, like just myself as a sort of mental check. But if I'm looking at a conference, then in the North, why do people come to conferences? Well, they want to see presentations, they want to learn, they want to share knowledge. That's the primary reason. And so, you have to have committees to make sure that you understand like who's going to be there and what kind of information is going to be shared. If you look at the Southern aspect is another reason why people come to conferences is because they want to see their colleagues. They want to see people, they want to meet new people, they want to reinforce relationships. So you have to make sure that you build in social networking events at a conference. They could be meet and greets, eating together and lunches is important. There could be other activities you have. The physical aspect, you have to look at the meeting space itself. Where are physically people going to sit? Are they going to be in chairs? Is it going to be inside? Is it going to be outside? What kind of technical requirements do you need? So now, Zoom is one of the technical requirements that people want. You need to have big screens or microphones so people can hear, depending on the size of the conference. And then for the spiritual aspect, I do this, and I really emphasize this. We also try to hold up our artists. So we try to have cultural gatherings at any of the conference we have where there's going to be Indigenous peoples, so that people can have, I guess, groundings. We had an opening prayer today. Dudama did that for us. This is a part of our cultural groundings. How are you going to deal with elders? How are they going to be treated? So these are the kind of things practically that I do when I use this model. So these are a bunch of examples that I've used, but I will close with this, that if you don't remember anything else from this day, if you can remember this model, then you can work and build on these kind of teachings for yourself. And hopefully you'll find ways of reaching some sort of balance. If something doesn't feel right, then maybe this is something that you can use as sort of your own little checklist. So I want to close my presentation part on that.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Ken. Would you like to stop sharing so we can go into gallery view?
Yes.
Awesome.
How does that work? Here we go.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you so much. So we do have some time. We are a little bit behind schedule and we want to honor your time, but we do have a little bit of time for a couple of questions before we go into our discussion groups. So if you'd like to unmute or if you'd like to put it into the chat, I see some messages for you. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, so I wowed them all. It's like, whoa, you blew me away.
Ooh, okay. If we wanted to use this work or pass it on, how would we cite it?
What I do is I cite my elders. So I've gone through university and things like that, and you want to have your references, listed on the back of the thing. But in oral traditions, we can't do that. So I cite elders. So Gwen Bear is a very important person. Imelda Purley, another person from my community. Merdina Marshall and her husband Albert Marshall, huge teachers. Noel Knockwood. I've learned from Lillian Pitawanakwat from the Anishinaabe Nation. Phil Gattensby from the Tagus Nation up in the Yukon, and Charlie Labrador, another Mi'kmaq elder who's passed on. But if you Google like Four Directions or Medicine Wheel or the Hoop of Life, you're going to get 10,000 hits. It's kind of buyer beware though, because you really want to understand and bring this to yourself. Anywhere where you see an Indigenous organization that uses the colors red, white, black, and yellow, you know that they are somehow connected to this Four Directions balance. because those four colors, and I've been taught about those four colors, but I didn't put them up because they are specific for my nation. Everybody orients them differently, but in general sense, they will represent the four races of the earth, where the red is like the indigenous peoples of the Americas, the yellow are the indigenous peoples from the East, Asia, the white being the indigenous peoples from or indigenous to Europe, and black being people in general to indigenous peoples within Africa. But there are also crossovers, and those aren't like absolutes. But in general, those red, white, black, and yellow, those are the four sacred colors. You'll notice that. So there's lots of resources on the internet, but they may not go into this kind of teaching.
All right, we have another question. Can you speak to how to work towards balance if there are close family members who are trying their best but are mentally ill or have addictions?
Yeah, well, addiction is one of those things that unfortunately, like that's prevalent in my community, and it's a symptom of something else. Like if a person's has an addiction, a lot of people that try to kick that addiction will go into spirituality, and we have a strong health services here, even though we have problems with addictions. But there's the Men's Healing Society that does sweat lodges, for example, and the ones that lead that are former addicts. There has to be a lot of patience and a lot of respect and love and trust that has to be demonstrated. But ultimately, everybody has to be able to make those own decisions for themselves, because if 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 we force the decision on somebody else, it's not going to take. And I try to be patient. I try to show support. I know I will say that I have a family member that I don't think can be helped. So I give her space, and I try not to do things to help reinforce like the path that she's on. But I'm always here if she wants to talk. So we can only really like demonstrate amongst ourselves like how we think we should be reacting. But addictions is a hard one, and there's specialists that will work on those healings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. Maybe something we can do in the follow-up is, if you're open to it, share your contact information if people have other questions offline.
Yes.
So next we're going to go actually into our next segment that I keep talking as a discussion, but it's actually more of an activity. And what we're going to have you do is jump into some of you will be in your same small group. I apologize. What happened is we had a few people drop off. And so I consolidated some of the groups so that you wouldn't just be in a group by yourself or with, one other person. We wanted you to have a nice group of people to mix with. So you'll go into that breakout and we'll share a link to a Jamboard. And I'm going to actually demonstrate in just a moment. And we'll have a guiding question. And the guiding question is around these teachings and this knowledge that Ken just shared. So it is a form of discussion, but it's a little different. It lets you type and see things visually. So you'll use sticky notes to write your ideas, and you'll have about 5 to 7 minutes to generate ideas. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this and share the actual Jamboard, because that'll make more sense. Here we go. Okay. So each group, you'll have your own board that will look just like this. Your sticky note will probably be a different color because I color coded them. And here's your guiding question. How can you use this information that you just heard to bring greater balance to humanity and the environment? Consider your own work, your relationship with the natural world, community, and interpersonal relationships. And so over here is where you would choose a sticky, and you can pick your color and you'll type in, and then start to populate those. Let me cancel that one. And I think Alina and Chris, we're gonna, oh, there we go. All right. Just to demonstrate. And so they've populated these, but I'm able to move them around. But what you want to do is for the first 5 minutes, just go through and put as many ideas as you can. One idea or thought per sticky note works best. And don't worry about if you're duplicating ideas. So we see elder knowledge and we see learning from our elders. That's fine. Just keep going. Sometimes those are the ones that kind of float to the top. So you'll have about 5 minutes, and everyone in your group will have access to this board. You'll all be able to see each other's work. And at about 5 minutes, something is going to happen on the back end. I'm going to show you in real time. And we'll drop in the medicine wheel. At this time, you'll work as a group and you'll start to move your stickies around into the quadrants where you feel that those ideas might work best. So that's just an example. I'm going to stop sharing. Awesome. Well, I think we have time for one or two groups to share. One of our groups came back first, so I offered to allow them to share first. So I'm actually going to share screen and pull up their Jamboard. And if you want to give me a thumbs up if this was your board, does this look like your board? Tudama? Okay. So if someone from your group wants to share, looks like you also had Adrian in that group.
And Trevor.
And Trevor. There you go, Trevor. So it's up to you all if anyone wants to share some insights or.
Speak to you once. Kia ora, in interest of time. I'll speak to my stickets anyway. Over in the culture environmental space, and thank you, Ken. As I listened, it triggered a lot about similar teachings we've had through our oral traditions at home. So these are some of the kind of elders' statements that came up. The environment, so in that space I entered, don't talk about the river, talk to the river, which is two different paradigms in terms of relationship to the environment. What was my other one? Within the environmental cultural space was the acknowledgement of our symbiotic relationships with our environment and our inherent responsibilities to maintain those. I think that was it. Oh, and my third one was, I was just intrigued by the primary value highlighted by Ken of love, and just went to the Māori definition, and we have our translation is aroha, which means aro, to give to the fore, ha of your life breath. So in a simple definition, it means to give of one's life breath in unconditional servitude of another. So whether that be interpersonal relationships or the environment. And Nani's going to take over now.
Okay. I'll just focus in on providing ethical spaces, because I think that actually deals with a lot of which helps create head towards restoring balance when there's imbalance. And that if we can provide those spaces in whatever we're doing or seek them, we can build relationships, help build trust amongst ourselves in our communities. They allow for honesty without feeling unsafe. So if we can create safe environments in which to be able to speak our truth or speak our experiences and share them, that has to be a good thing. And it encourages respect for one another and understanding. So I'm passing it on now.
So I can speak. This is Adrian. I thank you, Ken, for your presentation. It also brought up a lot of things for me. I'm an artist and also an end-of-life doula, and I really recognized in the like the aspect of artwork that engages feeling and healing. I also providing healing spaces as well. And then I put down also elevating care in our culture, supporting higher wages for care workers. So finding ways to elevate that care. I mean, not just around wages, but obviously other ways. And then I was really interested in the mapping onto the death cycle, the life and death cycle, and just the picture of us being out of balance and the lack of attention to death and ritual, and really taking care toward death. And so I just put attending to death on there as like a way to bring greater balance. Thank you.
Excellent. Awesome. And I know one of our groups lost their stickies and had to repopulate quickly. I won't put you on the spot unless you want me to after this group.
Yeah,
But this
I'll apologize.
oh, that's okay. I didn't even think of that as a warning, because it is right there, and it's like if you accidentally click it, it happens. So that was a learning moment for us as well. But this was group 2. And since I'm sharing screen, it's hard for me to go back and look at who was in group 2. But do we have anyone from group 2 that would like to speak to your
So
slide?
that was my group. This is Shannon Seneca. And we had a nice spread out group. But so when we started, we actually each were like impacted by Ken's talk in a very different way. Different things, part of his talk spoke to us all, and kind of really gave us insight into ways that we could really work on a personal level. And to kind of move to that, I guess the biggest resounding message that we got from kind of everybody was really understanding the importance of self, and understanding the importance of that individual, and how much we have to take care of ourselves, and how it really starts with each one of us. And so then we were just kind of like tried to populate this with what we were thinking were good ways to have balance and promote, goodness within people, and then group them accordingly. So just let everybody take a look at that, and if anybody else from the group wants to kind of add in anything.
I was in group 2, and I found the activity challenging, and I was really helpful, or I was really glad for the talk. And it gave me a lot to think about, and also reflect on the different things that I can work on in order to move towards like balance. Yeah. And so it just gave me a lot to think about. And yeah, and we had a good conversation. And I know reciprocity was on there a couple times. And of thinking about, both personal, but also in work, the different ways of thinking about balance and what we can do.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry, can I say something quick? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chantal Mussel from Group 2. The one thing that I forgot to put in with being distracted by a whole bunch of stuff with the kids was what I loved about Ken's talk is a lot of the fear at the moment that people put out is almost like that locus of control, right? It's all out there, and there's so much fear out there. And Ken's talk for me very much, exactly like Shannon said, drew it in to we have control, and first being self, then family, then community, and then nation. And if we each work that way and do our own little bit each day, it changes society. And I love that. I love that for me. It shifted everything from sort of like out of control and out of my locus of control to inside of me. And that was big for me. It was really beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking at the time and I just wanted to give group 3 a chance in case, unless there's somebody else from group 2 that wanted to jump in. In group 3, I know, sorry for the technical difficulty here, but did anyone want to just speak or share something maybe that came out of it? Because I saw you jamming away.
Yes, we did a good job, and that was my fault for clearing the frame. So my apologies. Two things really impressed me about this typology. One is that aroha, love, puts everything back into balance. That's just so poignant and so true. The other thing, one of the big ones that I thought about in using this framework is with youth that are struggling, and there are so many these days. And I think of them as placing the emphasis on the physical and the emotional. So when they're in that teen space, it's very much, what do I look like? Who do I love? Who loves me? How popular am I? And I thought of Ken's when he talked about fear, and he talked about out of balance being, we adults tend to talk more about politics and economics, and as a result, the balance shifts in a direction from northwest to southeast. I think with youth, it's the other way. They get out of balance from the southwest, shifting to the northeast. I'd be interested in Ken, whether Ken sees that as well in this framework. And that's my comment.
Yeah, I quickly respond. It's true that young people are the ones that are really adamant about environmentalism. There is this whole thing around, I know my kids are in their early 20s and they are getting impatient with people my age. And they're both working in community fields. My daughter's working with young youth and in daycare, those type of settings as an educator. And my son is in the environmental field working on environmental and wildlife management. And that has to be respected and that has to be supported because they are going to be our future leaders. Like in the future, we're going to be the ancestors, right? So our descendants will look back on us and say, what did we do? But it is really hard. I didn't get into this in this talk, but there is also a masculine and feminine aspect to this, this whole thing too. That would be another like half an hour to discuss that. But we tend to live in like the way it's categorized, and this is what I learned from Albert Marshall, one of my elders, is that we live in a hyper masculine society and that we should be embracing our feminine. And he'll even go as far as say it's time for men to step aside and let women lead. And I'll say, this is one of the reasons why I really appreciate the team at Red Star, because the women are the lead.
Thank you, Ken. And I know we could probably continue talking, but we do really want to honor everyone's time. And we have a couple more closing announcements and things. So I'm going to actually switch over to my slides. Does everyone see my slides? Okay, great.
Oh, sorry.